Chapter 32 Imagined. When Toothless and Hiccup wanted to get somewhere fast, they got there fast. No more dawdling or chatting in English with locals, or exploring or camping or wrestling. They slept by day and covered air by night, often traveling by foot when it was still too light out to fly. Hiccup almost felt they progressed too quickly, for the closer he got to Burke, the more his stomach soured. All planning on how to handle the demon had to be put on hold. Hiccup insisted that they needed more information to prepare any reliable strategy, and Toothless, while wary of ever coming into close proximity with the demon again, agreed. They spent the last full day of rest on a rocky outcropping in Fula, unpopulated and perfect to recuperate in the scrupulous sun, dining on mackerel and ensuring they would be in the best of shape for what lay ahead. The flight to Suvaroy turned out to be just as long as Hiccup remembered, but long flights they could handle. He worried more about the unexpected. He only had rumors and kamikazes' warnings to color his imagination with possible horrors to be faced. And with nothing but dark ocean, the occasional wispy cloud, and a little bit more dark ocean for outside stimulation, his imagination would not let up. Beast with eyes aglow, and such awesome mind powers that he would jump straight off of Toothless's back and into the ocean. Fire so hot from Hoya would melt into his back and seal against his ribs, stopping his heart in a most excruciating manner. Toothless losing his mind, turning on him, flying them straight into an awaiting mouth. Hiccup had long since come to the point where he would rather get this encounter over with than suffer his accursed creativity any longer.
"Are we there yet?"
"For the last time, no." Silence fell over the pair once more. The moon was full and bright, but it did little to keep Hiccup alert when the only break in scenery consisted of waves.
"How about now?"
"Hiccup!" The boy collapsed forwards, resting his chin on the top of the dragon's head.
"I'm sorry. This is taking forever. I can't sense anything. I don't even know what I'm supposed to be looking for."
"It's probably not something you could sense anyway," Toothless shrugged. "Rest assured I will let you know as soon as we trespass into her territory."
"But I hate waiting."
Toothless released a forbearing sigh and shook the human from his head. He happened to catch both of Hiccup's cheeks with well-aimed ear fins. "I know," Toothless inflicted wryly, "but I waited for you with that fairy female, and you took forever. You can wait a little longer." Hiccup rubbed his stinging cheeks, unexpectedly hot against the biting winds.
"Oh, no. Don't you... You're the one who decided it would be a great idea to land on the boat of man-eaters. Do you have any idea how badly that could have gone?"
"We could have left right after," Toothless reminded him. "You had to prance off."
"No,"
Hiccup snapped, refusing to take the full blame.
"No. You were all over those girls. You can't blame me. You chose to land first, and you were not complaining when Kami asked me to see that Terra."
"We got them to listen. You have people who believe you now. Focus on that." Hiccup could still recognize how lucky they were. In all honesty, he thought their encounter with the bogs turned out for the best, and against every odd at that, seeing how he shamelessly tormented the captain beforehand whilst sustaining a reputation to precede him. The older crowd on the ship never approached Toothless, and many continued to give the dragon mistrustful looks long after they departed. But Hiccup had opened some eyes, and they were the eyes that related best to the captain of the ship. It also served as a confirmation on who to target if he survived and ever got around to spreading dragon awareness. His generation, those younger, the ones who didn't have a lifetime of war ingrained into their blood just yet. Those were the minds that could still be open to this sort of bond with the dragon. If he died, at least the truth wouldn't die with him. Still, he couldn't quite get over how reckless Toothless had been with their safety, even if he took it for granted not too shortly after.
"Why would you even care about that?"
he grumbled. Toothless cared more about ending the demon's control over dragons than uniting dragons and humans. "I didn't, really. But you were going to do that thing you do again." Hiccup curled his lip. He hadn't the faintest idea of what Toothless babbled about.
"Thing? What thing?"
"You know, that thing you do where you think about doing something and then fly away."
What are you talking about?
You did it when we first left your nest. That Blade female who hurt you. You thought about following her. I could see it in your face. I could see you thinking about how events would play if you had. With your imagination. Hiccup rested back in the saddle, unable to find any words to argue the speculation because he had wanted to stop her. But then you didn't.
Okay,
Hiccup conceded when control over his tongue came back to him.
But don't pretend for a second you aren't glad I left.
Toothless went on as though Hiccup never spoke. Then you did it with the soft female, Doris.
We had to leave,
Hiccup said automatically, too quickly. You didn't say goodbye, Toothless continued. You stood there and stared at her forever. You wasted more time second-guessing yourself than action, and after that, you left after doing nothing.
I had to.
You still didn't say goodbye in the end. Hiccup had thought about that night over and over. He still, to this day, didn't understand Doris or her motives, where her loyalties lied, or if she were truly interested in him. He chose to leave. He had to leave.
It's too dangerous to take those chances. If I had gone after Astrid, if I had woken Doris...
Doris could have tried to stop them, perhaps already had some system in place because she was meant to watch them. Their simple escape could have quickly turned into something neither of them had foreseen, much like their entrance. And going after Astrid... She could have turned tail and killed him for being a traitor. She could have refused to see reason, his reason anyway, and told on them. Or worse, they could have been forced to do something with her to keep her mouth shut, to keep their secret. Hiccup shook the unsettling scenarios from his mind.
Look,
he said after he managed to collect his wits.
The safer thing for us would have been to leave. In all cases, it's the lesser of the unknowns. At least when we're off on our own, we're safer.
It was the truth, their creed. In the end, trusting others would always prove dangerous to them. Then why does it always make you so sad? Hiccup swallowed and glanced down at the ocean far, far below them. His stomach still folded in on itself when he tried to picture Doris's face when she woke up to find them missing. But it was safest for them. Even if the people involved got hurt, they were alive and free. That had to be their first priority. You were going to do it again.
No,
Hiccup again, weak. You leave your problems when you're given the option. I couldn't let you do it again. This female was closest to you. It would have hurt you the most.
It was still dangerous.
Hiccup griped under his breath because Toothless was right. If he had left Kamikaze feeling angry and betrayed even after he got his rubies back, we live dangerous lives, Toothless countered. Occupational hazard.
Yeah, well, it wasn't just my life that was in danger.
He recalled Bruna as an intimidating figure when he was younger, but never had the woman stared at him as though he were riddled with disease. The hostility she directed towards him when he returned to the deck could have been concentrated and used as a weapon. You can't simply fly away from all your problems, Hiccup. Hiccup wouldn't stand for any more condescension from his dragon.
Hey, I'm flying to this problem.
Yes, and I'm very proud of you, Toothless responded, never one to pass up an opportunity to patronize his human.
Fine. Yeah, okay, then we're going to find your drove after this,
Hiccup decided on the spot.
And you can get that girl Fury back.
What? Hiccup smiled at the high-pitched ring Toothless's voice took on. That has nothing to do with anything. Where's this coming from?
Yes,
the young man firmly nodded his head, liking the idea more and more.
If we survive, that is. It'll be straight to the north for us.
Hiccup expected some sort of comeback, even another slap to the cheek via earfin. He didn't anticipate Toothless shaking his head like he suddenly had a bug in his ear. He did so again and again, the plates lining his skull twitching madly.
Toothless?
It's much sooner. Her power has grown. Hiccup's spine stiffened, his heart hastened.
The demon? You mean we're...
He had forgotten. In those moments of arguing with Toothless, in that lull of waiting, he had somehow forgotten where they were headed. He remembered now. All the fear and painful anticipation began to build and weave into a bezoar of panic Hiccup had to forcibly and repeatedly swallow down. "Yeah." Toothless sounded like he could hardly breathe. Hiccup began rubbing circles in the side of the dragon's neck, wanting to remind the dragon in any way he could that he wasn't alone.
"It's okay. How are you, buddy?"
"I'm okay," Toothless immediately replied, but he didn't sound certain. "I can sense her. We're in her area now." Hiccup's eyes darted around the vicinity, trying to find some marker of this boundary, but all he could make out was an increase in clouds. They seemed to thicken in their path, low-hanging and clammy. Hiccup took a shallow breath.
"Think we can move in further?"
They would have to, anyway, to reach land. But if Toothless couldn't do it, they would turn back. All the way back to Fowler, if need be. "Yeah." Hiccup could tell Toothless tried to sound assuring in his consent, but the dragon's uneasiness was all too noticeable. "I can feel her, but I think I'm okay." Hiccup allowed a small smile.
"You're repeating yourself."
The opacity surrounded them now, a dense and cold fog, which soon replaced the moon's purpose with a light of its own. It felt wrong against Hiccup's cheeks and knuckles, as sinister and tainted as the caress of Hell's bone fingers. The young man felt a new appreciation for the tunic he had taken to wearing underneath the vest, not only for the warmth, but to protect any more of his skin from subjection.
"What is this?"
He choked into his sleeve, unwilling to breathe in more than he had to. It would soon be impossible. Disgusting as the substance felt in his body, it only thickened as they flew onward, an atmosphere that certainly didn't exist when he left. Hiccup chanced to look behind him, but the mist had swallowed them whole. Navigation felt a Toothless now. It's from her. It's part of her essence somehow. It's strengthened as she has. Hiccup grimaced. No wonder he didn't want to breathe it in. "Do you want to find land, or do you want to find the nest first?" Hiccup blinked against the fog. Its temperature had begun to sting his eyeballs.
"What?"
"She's to the right. We're closer to her. But the nearest land will be to our left. We should decide now."
"Well..."
Hiccup scrambled to make a decision. He felt off balance in this mist, and being so close to the demon, the thought of finally seeing it terrified him.
"How are you feeling?"
"I could do it now. She hasn't pulled me in yet. I can feel her against my scales all around us, but I've been safe so far. I think it will hold out. I can handle a visit from her."
"You can? Are you sure?"
"I'm not sure of anything," Toothless freely admitted. "But we've made it this far. I feel like I need to do this now, because if I turn away in this moment, if I pass this up, I'll just keep thinking of excuses not to do it."
"Yeah,"
Hiccup whispered. He couldn't imagine deciding to come back to this mist, knowing it would be here.
"I feel exactly the same way."
"Then get ready, because we'll be there soon."
"Will this get thicker?"
Hiccup coughed. It felt too thick now, filling his mouth. What if it was poisonous? What if it had lasting effects to a human? Would bonding with Toothless protect him? "It'll thin out once we reach the nest, I promise." Toothless paused a moment before adding, "Or from what I can remember, anyway." Hiccup closed his eyes, shutting out the oppressing miasma. It only augmented the sensations he felt searing his ears like the decayed nails of a draugr, so he focused on the fine shifts of Toothless's body, the well of heat from Hurria encumbered him with. He relinquished control to the dragon, entrusting the relatively safe deliverance to the nest in Toothless's wings. "Going down." It was the only warning Hiccup got before Toothless arced his body downwards, pulling in his wings. Hiccup's foot flipped into first, his fingers automatically tightened against the thick cusp of the saddle, and his body absorbed every sensation of diving and burning ice. The sound of 1,000 whispers suddenly filled his ears, harmonious, incoherent rasps as thick as the haze. Hiccup couldn't remember when it started or from where it came. It could have been a part of the mist this whole time and had only impressed upon him now. The Night Fury's body worked as they flew, sweeping and swooping and weaving through something. Hiccup made an effort to open his eyes from time to time, but dizziness had taken a hold of him. That poison had touched his lungs too much, and he tried his damnedest not to breathe it, not to cough too loudly. He focused on Toothless and his foot, wondering if they actually spent an eternity navigating this, or if this were only the beginning. When the disquieting touch of that fog began to lighten and a faint heat began to wash over his face, Hiccup finally blinked his eyes to attentiveness. The fog was still there, but thinner. Shadow over shadow appeared, materializing into stacked rocks, and avoided just as quickly. Water rippled below them as they zigzagged in a pattern Hiccup couldn't keep up with. He could breathe easier, but where his throat received respite, his mind picked up turmoil. His stomach nodded as the largest stone to materialize yet, too large for his full vision to grasp, and too large to dodge. A volcano.
This.
The nest, yes.
Are you okay?
Hiccup got out in a crushed whisper as they rocketed towards an opening in the dank wall. Not even the unknown would slow them down. They pitched into the opening, and his vision was lost to him once more. Frumhurria hummed against his back, and Hiccup took comfort in knowing he was sandwiched between two forms of protection.
I'm fine,
Toothless said shortly. Hiccup detected a hint of aggression from the Night Fury, though not directed at him. An older Toothless began to emerge with every passing moment, one full of vengeance and wounded pride. Toothless would face the demon with a clear mind. The possibility was becoming fact with each wingspan traveled, and with this realization came a darker intent. Hiccup wouldn't quell the belligerence. Toothless needed this. Hiccup learned enough, picked up enough from his friend to know that this was a healing process for dragons. Vengeance could destroy a human from the inside out, but for a dragon it was pride's ointment. His hand returned to Toothless's scales once more. The dragon had his support for this. They re-emerged from the passage through the volcano wall, and the first human to ever cross into the dragon's nest felt his breath torn from him. He was here. He was in the nest. It was magnificent and terrifying and more crowded than he could ever have anticipated. He was aware of hundreds, thousands of dragons huddled against every free rock and ledge. He was aware of the sheer size of this volcano, appearing larger than any island off of Berg, larger than how it looked from the outside. A pool of smoke swirled below, but it could have been fire for all the heat and hellish light that emitted from it. Unnaturalness rose alongside the extreme temperature. The hairs on Hiccup's arms, on the back of his neck, reached upward to warn him against ever nearing it. Frumhurria managed to make her way from his shoulders to ready in his grip without him ever realizing. Toothless circled the walls, clinging to the edges of the hollow for reasons Hiccup wouldn't question. He, too, felt safer, less exposed in this strategy. The dragons may serve as an obvious danger, but the obscurity of the chasm somehow read as more perilous of the two. They bypassed lines and lines of inactive dragons. Dragons Hiccup had only seen in the manual before, dragons he had never seen at all. None reacted to them. None gave them a sparing glance. Either they couldn't see the human on board, or they couldn't see at all. Eventually, and it could have taken no time at all, Toothless managed to find an open spot between a monstrous nightmare and a dragon unrecognizable to Hiccup. The unknown dragon resembled a gronkel in size and shape, but with larger wings folded at its back and a long horn situated in the center of its crest. It stared out over the ledge, unresponsive to their arrival. The nightmare was also unresponsive, but it, at least, faced them. Hiccup never got to face the nightmare in the kill ring. He had only ever seen nightmares up close when he slipped out during raids, and even then it was all teeth and flashes of a red hulking figure in the firelight. He never imagined having one sitting so docile next to him, towering over him in its passive observation. But this wasn't docile as a contented, purring terror would be in his lap. What Hiccup faced was a statue with dead, glassy eyes to serve as windows to a breathing body. He could feel those eyes stare straight through him. He opened his mouth, thinking if he should say something to provoke it, to see if it were even alive. The stare made him uncomfortable. Then a thought came to him. How loud should I speak? Audio consciously registered for the second time. The same sounds he experienced outside, but louder, far beyond a whisper. A chorus of hums and croons and rattles swirled and meshed like the miasma below. The dragons were speaking, possibly singing. They continued to make this noise, each with its own vibrato that miraculously synced with every other dragon for reasons Hiccup could only imagine. He imagined they were crying for help. "Hey!" he chanced a rough whisper to the unseeing nightmare. No response. The subtle shifts of its shoulders with each breath were the only clue that it even lived. After another beat, it blinked. "They can hear you," Toothless decided on mentioning then. "They can see you, too. They're simply too apathetic to acknowledge you." The echoes of a haunting remembrance could not be hidden from Hiccup's ears. His hand immediately went to rubbing Toothless's neck.
"Toothless, are you okay?"
He must have asked it a dozen times already, but he had to keep checking. It wasn't just mind control Hiccup worried about. He worried about any lasting damage this experience may have done to Toothless, whether their stint in the south was quite enough for the dragon to recover. Toothless wasn't being controlled by the demon. He was responding to Hiccup at least, but Hiccup could feel the dragon trembling slightly under his fingers. "Yes." The same assurance to the same question. Before anything more could be said, a string of dragons swooped in, each burdened by a livestock. The sudden emergence startled Hiccup into gripping Fanmeria so tightly his fingers cramped. Fascinated and tense, he watched as they swung over the center of the open pit to drop their haul one by one, and then continued their flight to any open spot found against the wall. It happened so quickly, so efficiently, that it could have been choreographed.
"They're feeding her?"
He posed it as a question, but Hiccup knew it to be true. He followed the bodies in their fall, his imagination trying and failing to liken such a sensation, such a fate. He could have sworn he saw that goat flailing, still alive, before the miasma swallowed it.
"She's down there?"
"Yes," came the hushed reply.
"Have you seen her?"
"Did she even come out?" "Yes," Toothless repeated. "When her appetite surpassed what she's fed, she'd take one of us." The crooning, the rattling, ceased. The awareness of the silence slammed into Hiccup with the weight of that neighboring nightmare stare. Those benumbed amber eyes looked at him now. It looked at him with an increasing awareness that seemed to synchronize with its own welling dread. Only the stare of the dragon behind it could drag Hiccup's eyes away, and the dragon behind that one, and the dragon behind that one. His heart pounded in his throat as he realized every beast lining the wall now focused on him and Toothless.
"Toothless?"
he whispered, warning ringing in his voice louder than his own breath. They needed to leave. No sooner had that thought passed his mind, undoubtedly shared by his companion, did something happen. A voice rose and ricocheted off every rock and scale, blooming from the very pores of the volcano, filling the silence with something far worse.
"A presence sensed new and wrong."
It could have been female, it could have been melodious or broken, chimeful or discordant. Hiccup couldn't categorize it. It was there, and it was immoral.
"Death pursues what can't belong."
"What is that?"
Hiccup croaked out. His fingers curled around Fanmeria's string so tightly he could have been bleeding. He didn't know whether to look at the swirling miasma a lifetime below them or at any of the thousands of eyes fixated on the pair of them. They needed to leave. They needed to leave. "You can hear her?" Toothless sounded just as stricken as Hiccup felt, but it could have very well been because they both heard the same thing. "How is it? How can you?" Hiccup was less concerned with how and more concerned with whom.
"That was her?"
He was too afraid to move. He knew they were found out, but some illogical part of his terror-filled mind kept him believing that they could still make it without detection. He wanted to believe that they still had stealth on their side.
"Familiar company brings a meal, not to share, but for me steal."
The voice crooned, falsely delighted. The nightmare to his left shifted. No life came to its eyes with the movement, but its body appeared to ready for action. Hiccup tensed further still. Knees locking, ankles loose, tail fin positioned, bowstring plucked. He tried to spread his awareness to his surroundings, mark every dragon near him, keep his mind calm, and gather that volatile energy within his chest to power the bow. "We need to get out now." Hiccup hadn't seen the demon himself, but he had seen enough, heard enough. It was teasing them now. It knew of them.
"Yes, please."
"An empty spot within my craw craves your flesh, your bones bled raw."
The nightmare lunged, but they had already shot off the ledge. Screams and screeches filled the air, 1,000 wings beat against scaled bodies and threw stifling air as the shelves were cleared. Every available dragon dove after them. A multicolored vortex of winged reptiles enwrapped them within moments of takeoff. Toothless's sleek and smaller build allowed for them to dart around those dragons closest, to angle away from the sharpest divers. This would prove to be the greatest obstacle course yet, and somewhere deep within his fear-seized heart, the prospect excited Hiccup. Even through the dim, reddish lighting, Hiccup could make out where they entered. The breach was below them, a temporary path just barely visible within the crashing sentry. They could make it. "Exit!" Hiccup gasped out. He flicked the tail fin to turn, but Toothless fought it.
Your fear, so sweet, so strong.
Up first.
But
A cover of zipplebacks and flash fangs overlay them.
To tease my tongue, your lives are gone.
Up, up! Hiccup obeyed, trusting Toothless, even as they flew towards the descending array of teeth and claws head-on.
Your odds unfavored, my web too strong.
Miraculously, a number of the dragons began to pull back, shrieking and shaking their heads, eyes bulging in panic and anguish.
Speed won't negate a line step wrong.
Hiccup pressed himself against Toothless's back and glanced down in time to see white. Teeth, long, narrow, sharp, as big as trees. Then the mouth registered, and the head. Hiccup felt time slow around him, just so he could fully comprehend what he stared at. And it was only the head, for nothing else could possibly fit within this vision. It emerged from the abyss, remnants of orange-tainted smoke spilling between its teeth. He reacted. He had all the power and fear and energy he needed. Seized by panic and action, Hiccup risked leaning to the side of the saddle and fired a screeching bolt into the open mouth. It struck the back of its black tongue, making it impossible to tell if a scorch mark were left, but the dragon stopped in its ascension. The jaw, so gargantuan in size, took forever to snap shut. It missed them by a long shot, but two nadders and a marsh tiger were not so fortunate. Hiccup and Toothless weaved through the broken net of dragons, scattered in their last shreds of self-preservation.
You dare smite this awesome beast. Your fates are sealed as my next feast.
Hiccup didn't look down again. They had the head start they needed. They continued to shoot upward, spinning out of reach for any claw or snout that snapped at them. The dragons, recovering from the scare, gave chase once more. But not once did the dragons shoot fire. Hiccup and Toothless burst from the top of the volcano, an opening Hiccup hadn't known of until that moment. They moved so quickly, the dragons screaming behind them, that it took Hiccup a moment to register their return to the outside.
"That was her!"
Hiccup yelped out the second the icy touches of the mist shocked him out of his stupor. They continued to race into the alabaster murkiness. They couldn't slow, and Hiccup couldn't dwell on the horror he had just seen, the master behind this whole war, when the dragons were still following them. Yes, that was her, and she's going to drag us back in any way she can without leaving the nest. Hiccup glanced behind him and found it impossible to count how many dragons pursued them. He and Toothless were fast, but they were outnumbered. All it would take was one dragon catching hold of them, and it would be over.
Heed this beck, and hear this call. Fight me still, your will shall fall.
Hiccup swore, risking a mouthful of the mist, but he was well past caring about breathing correctly. She sounded just as loud outside, and it suddenly occurred to him that as long as they were in this essence of hers, they would still hear her. She could still sense them. She could still control the dragons. A roar bellowed far too closely from below them. Hiccup glanced over his shoulder to see the large, rounded jaw of a squadron bob up from the water. It could swim almost as fast as they could fly. Almost. The boys soared upwards, glided between tightly positioned rocks, swooped beneath overhangs. Little by little, the herd of pursuers fell farther and farther behind.
"So she's gained even more control over them?"
"Yes, she couldn't have ordered them to do this before." Toothless sounded just as bewildered as Hiccup.
"But she's not coming out herself."
"Never does," Toothless grunted. His speed remained outmatched, but a human burdened him, as did Hiccup's many effects, and they had been flying for so long already. A timberjack began to gain ground on them, its wings sounding like blades sharpened upon blades. Every swing sent a painful chill down Hiccup's spine. The boy twisted in his seat and drew the string back, releasing the second bolt of the night. This one aimed for the rock arch they just underpassed. It struck true, and the earth structure exploded, showering dozens of dragons. He winced and faced forwards, concentrating on helping Toothless maneuver, then dwell on any injuries of his making. The choking smoke began to clear greatly. They left far faster than they entered.
"We're close to the barrier,"
Hiccup gasped. "It's right ahead." Toothless sounded just as excited as Hiccup. They escaped with their lives. What was not to be excited about? Hiccup could almost envision the exact line of where the demon's hold would release, where he would once again feel the moon upon his back and his lungs would fill with salt and moisture rather than toxicant. A nightmare, miraculously, managed to stay a few wingspans behind them, but they were well out of its reach. Soon, all too soon, they would be untouchable to the handful of dragons that could keep up with them. "Wait!" Hiccup switched the tail fin into third while reshouldering from Hurria. "What are you doing?" Toothless roared, but he went with the suggestion, looping high and backwards to retrace their flight pattern. "Get that nightmare," Hiccup ordered. "Knock it out of the field like I did with you." Toothless didn't respond, but he went along with Hiccup as Hiccup had done with him. The nightmare passed below them, lacking their agility.
Test me, tease me, you know not, this path that leads to cold and rot.
Hiccup ignored the booming voice. They spun out from under the open claws of her timberjack, who suddenly appeared from above and rocketed into the nightmare's momentarily exposed back. It released a horrified squeal, not quite fast enough to keep track of the evasive dragon and human, not with its large, gawking body and a mind not fully its own. It fell a large distance, catching itself close to the surface of the water. Hiccup couldn't be sure if it were out of the barrier or not. "Again!" They body-checked the dragon once more, having a good head start to gather substantial speed. It released another yelp just before it went skidding hard into the ocean. "Did it? Watch it!" Hiccup reacted just in time to go along with Toothless's dive. The timberjack that just tried to snatch at them tried to stop its flight in desperate, awkward movements, flapping those razor-sharp wings to its belly to keep from moving so much as a hair forward. "That's the barrier, isn't it?" Hiccup gasped excitedly. "The exact... Yes!" Everything happened too quickly for him to feel that overwhelming horror any longer. They were away from the demon, they were at the barrier, and the flailing nightmare below them crooned in a voice that could only be its own. They freed it. "This one too," he decided right there. How could he not? How could he ever turn away from a creature enslaved when freedom lay directly before? Toothless made a quick ascension before spinning into a sharp turn and folding his wings back. Hiccup pressed himself flat against Toothless, lessening the wind resistance, joining together to create a sharp missile. "Watch its wings," Toothless warned before he body-checked the timberjack in the same manner as he had the nightmare. His short, stocky neck was perfect for avoiding injury. Timberjacks had a body just as long as those of nightmares, but far thinner. The jack went sailing farther than the first target, managing to catch itself before hitting the water, but too far out for it to continue its attack. It shook its head as it hovered, whimpering loudly, glancing around. To Hiccup, to Toothless, to the nightmare with eyes that blinked incessantly. "Yes!" Hiccup cheered, his arms rising in the air without him realizing. His heart still pounded in his ears from leftover excitement, thrumming blood against his wrists and neck, but now the drain of fusing from Hurria began to dawn on him.
Thwart me once, your fortune fine.
"No more. Too many are coming," Toothless warned. Hiccup glanced back to see a larger crowd of the lagging dragon onslaught billowing towards them from the smoke. "Right," he breathed. The heaviness of his limbs really started to settle in that brief reprieve of action. Hollowness stuck at his chest. "Another time. Let's go." He didn't want to hear that voice any longer. He didn't want to be anywhere near that mist.
Try again.
They flew away from the barrier and, as they left, the demon's voice, losing much of its anger in place of promise, grew fainter and fainter.
Your souls are mine.
By the time they made it to the land Toothless sensed before, Hiccup not only felt tired, but sick, dizzy, heavy, sluggish, exhausted, and unable to breathe quite right. He couldn't muster the proper excitement that the two dragons decided to follow them. The timberjack at a wide distance, the nightmare, once managing to bring itself into the air, stuck to Toothless's tail. They struggled in their flight, looking around as though unsure of where they were or where they were supposed to go, and, upon landing, warbled until Toothless told them to shut up. "I'll explain soon enough," he barked while Hiccup dismounted. They were on an island to the north, possibly closer to Visithug territory than Burke's. Hiccup could have identified which one by looking around for a bit, but such a sickness came over him that his vision blotted. He coughed, his body shuddering, and he stumbled to some tall grass before the contents of his stomach spilled from his mouth. Toothless immediately felt alarm set in. "What? What's going on?" Toothless shuffled to the ocean shore, falling to his knees and cupping salty water into his mouth to clear the taste of sick from it. Thirst clawed at his throat. Trapped in a daze and only focused on feeling better, he turned to his pack, without responding, to find the water skin, drinking deeply from the pouch the moment his hands touched it. Water dribbled from the corners of his mouth, and he almost coughed it back up as his lungs continued to cry out against the poison they were subjected to. He got careless. He became too enthralled with the situation, with escaping and then freeing those dragons. He didn't think of the consequences being human would cost him. Now he paid for it. Tainted by the essence of the demon, weakened by his unmeasured firing. A hard head bumped Hiccup away from his effects, another knocked his canteen from his weak hold. Hiccup continued to nudge Hiccup strongly until he was fully pushed to the ground. Then the dragon draped himself over the top of his pitiful human.
"No, wait,"
Hiccup mumbled weakly. He pushed at Toothless's nose, trying to get to the two dragons that had followed them.
"We have to.
They're fine," Toothless insisted. He lifted a wing to give Hiccup a clear view of the tagalongs, now more visible in the quickly lightening sky. The nightmare had curled itself into such a tight ball that Hiccup had to wonder how one could possibly appear so small. Its wings shelled over it so that it resembled a red boulder. The timberjack was rubbing its murky green hide against a tree like an animal with an itch to be scratched. Hiccup could scratch it. That would be a great way to befriend it. Toothless curled securely around him, dropping a wing over his head and stopping his muddled thoughts. Sleep. Hiccup wanted to argue further. He wanted to make sure those dragons were, in fact, freed from the demon's hold, that his theory of barriers and free wills was correct, but he felt too tired, too sick. His head spun and his vision swam, and he just wanted to get that disgusting essence out of his body. The temptation was too strong.
"Okay,"
he finally let up. His eyes slipped shut, and he burrowed into the dragon's warm side like a blind hatchling. They'd deal with Burke tomorrow.